If someone told me that the home I bought with every last penny I had would be the place I'd be thrown out of by my own daughter, I would have laughed. But that was before I learned that love doesn't always mean loyalty. My name is Margaret Ellison, and I'm 63 years old. I spent my entire life building a future for my daughter, sacrificing every comfort so she could have one. And when I finally thought I'd found peace, a beautiful home we could share, she turned on me. Not slowly, not hesitantly, but with the cold sharpness of betrayal that cut deeper than any wound ever could. I was cast out in the middle of the housewarming party, while strangers danced under the lights I paid for. If you think that's where my story ends, you're wrong. That's only the beginning. Because what they didn't realize was that I still had a fight left in me. After my husband Thomas passed away, the house grew louder in its silence. Every creaking floorboard, every ticking clock reminded me that I was alone. At 63, retirement wasn't a relief. It was a slow unraveling of purpose. The classroom I had once commanded as a teacher, the vibrant children's voices, the constant chaos, it was all gone now. What remained were faded lesson plans in a drawer and a kitchen that hadn't seen a real dinner for years. My daughter Becky was the light that still flickered in my life. She had grown into a poised woman with two beautiful children, Emily and Jonah, and a husband, Mark, who seemed decent enough. Our calls were frequent but short, visits even shorter. I often sensed a rushed politeness in Becky's voice, a lingering hesitance that told me she had moved on, carved her own space where my presence was more obligation than comfort. Still, I dreamed of a warm living room with toys scattered across the floor, the smell of stew on the stove, the sound of my grandkids arguing about cartoons. I wanted to wake up in a house where laughter echoed again, even if I wasn't at the center of it. I wanted to belong. One morning, as the autumn sun poured through my lace curtains, I stared at my financial ledger. The pension was steady, the savings modest. But the old house, ours for 30 years, had nearly tripled in value. I thought, what good is a house full of ghosts when I could trade it for a home full of life? That afternoon, I called Becky and asked if we could meet. We chose a small cafe near her office, neutral ground. She arrived in her usual rush, phone still in hand, makeup pristine, her suit jacket hugging her shoulders like armor. "Mom, is everything okay?" she asked, concerned but distracted. I was thinking, I began, carefully folding my napkin, maybe it's time we lived together again. I've been alone for so long, and you've got the kids, and the space is tight. Becky blinked, clearly surprised. "You want to move in with us?" "Not just move in," I smiled. "I was thinking, I sell the old house, cash in some of the investments. We could buy a new home, bigger, with space for everyone. I'd live on the ground floor, and you'd have the upstairs. The kids would love a backyard." Becky looked away, chewing her lip. "That's generous, Mom. But are you sure? That's a big commitment." "I'm sure," I nodded. "I don't want to be a burden, Becky. I want to help. I want to be around my family again." She hesitated. "We'd have to talk to Mark. He's particular about finances and paperwork. If it's in your name, there could be issues with taxes or inheritance." I had already thought of that. "Then let's put it in your name. Makes everything smoother, doesn't it?" Her eyes widened slightly. "You'd do that?" "I trust you," I said simply. "I don't need ownership. I just want to spend my final years with the people I love." She nodded slowly, still calculating something in her mind. "Okay, let me talk to Mark. This could be great." And for a moment, I believed it. That night, I sat in my favorite armchair, sipping tea, imagining the holidays we'd spend under the same roof. The idea of dying in a room that smelled like baby powder and cookies instead of antiseptic and loneliness, it warmed something inside me. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. I met Mark, who was all smiles and charm, shaking my hand with sudden warmth. "We're grateful, Margaret," he said, patting my shoulder. "This means a lot." I visited properties with them. Becky took the lead, listing priorities. A big kitchen, a playroom, at least 4 bedrooms. I walked behind them, nodding, quietly agreeing to whatever they suggested. The realtors often looked at me, puzzled, as if unsure who was actually making the purchase. I didn't care. I saw my room in each house, how I decorated, where I'd place the rocking chair. I imagined Sunday mornings with Emily running into my arms, Jonah asking for pancakes. Eventually, we found the one, a 2-story colonial home with a wraparound porch and a blooming magnolia in the front yard. My heart leapt the moment I saw it. "This is it," I whispered. It was expensive, more than I'd planned for, but I had enough after selling the house and dipping into a few CDs I'd been saving. I signed over the funds. The deed, just as promised, went in Becky's name. I stood outside the house on closing day, holding the keys in my hand, heart pounding with a joy I hadn't felt in years. "We did it," I told Becky, who smiled back at me with a glint I couldn't quite place, but I dismissed it. This was a dream come true, a new beginning, a home at last. Moving into the new house felt like slipping into a warm bath, calming, almost too perfect. Boxes were stacked in the hallway. The smell of new paint still clung to the walls. Becky was busy organizing the kitchen, barking cheerful orders at the kids, while Mark walked around with a tape measure, muttering plans for furniture. "Think we should knock out this wall," he said casually, gesturing toward the entryway. "Open concept makes everything look bigger." I stood in the corner, clutching a photo frame of Thomas and me from our wedding day. "I think it's fine the way it is," I said softly. Mark smiled, a dazzling, hollow smile. Sure. Just throwing out ideas. This house is going to be a real gem, thanks to you, Margaret." His words were sweet, but there was something in the way he looked at me. Not like a man grateful to his mother-in-law, but like someone inspecting an investment, measuring how much more he could squeeze from it. That night, I overheard a conversation. The walls in the house were thin, thinner than I expected. I was placing a blanket on the foot of my bed when I heard Mark's voice through the floor vent. "She'll never ask for anything. That's the beauty of it," he said. Becky replied, her voice hesitant. "I just don't want to hurt her. She thinks this is about togetherness." Mark laughed. "It is, until we don't need her anymore." I froze. My fingers tightened around the blanket. Was I hearing it wrong? Was it a joke? A misunderstanding? I told myself it didn't mean anything. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe they were just stressed. But from that moment, something in me shifted. The warmth of the new home began to cool. I tried to shake it off, tried to smile when the kids ran to hug me, tried to join Becky in the kitchen, but I couldn't forget Mark's voice. The next day, we had a small celebration, just the family. Pizza boxes, paper plates, music from Becky's Bluetooth speaker. Mark raised a can of soda and toasted to new beginnings. To family, I added, smiling. Becky raised her glass. To Mom for making this possible. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe them. Later, as I helped Becky clean the dishes, Mark hovered nearby, typing rapidly on his phone. "You know," he said without looking up, "this arrangement really helps us. I've been looking at refinancing options. Now that the mortgage is in Becky's name, we might be able to tap into some equity." I paused. "Equity? Already?" "Yeah, market's hot," he replied, finally meeting my gaze, just thinking ahead. There it was again, that glint. Calculating, detached, but polite enough to pass as concern. I tried to laugh it off. "Let's not jump too far. We just moved in." Mark shrugged. "Of course. Just talking." That night I couldn't sleep. My bed was soft, the room decorated just the way I liked, but peace escaped me. My instincts, sharpened over decades of navigating classrooms and adolescence, were whispering now. Something was off. Over the next week, small things began to pile up. I'd find mail addressed to Becky with financial documents I didn't recognize. Mark would make comments about ownership responsibilities about D's in front of the kids. Becky, who used to call me daily, now seemed absorbed in errands and meetings. Still, I clung to hope. I cooked dinner one evening, meatloaf, Becky's favorite since childhood. The table was set, the candles lit, but when I called everyone to eat, Mark said, "We grabbed burgers on the way back. Sorry, didn't know you were cooking." I looked at the untouched table, the steaming dishes, the napkins folded neatly by each plate. Becky gave me a sheepish smile. "You didn't say anything, Mom." I thought it was obvious." Mark patted my shoulder. "Don't worry, we'll eat it tomorrow." The kids ran off, giggling, oblivious. I stood there alone, surrounded by the scent of effort gone unnoticed. That night, I sat on the back porch. The magnolia tree swayed gently in the breeze, petals glowing pale under the porch light. I held a glass of wine, the chill in the air creeping into my bones. It wasn't the rejection that hurt. It was the realization that I had offered my soul on a silver platter, and it had become just another thing to be consumed. But still, I reminded myself, it's just the beginning. Things can change. They're stressed. New house, new routines. Maybe I was imagining the worst, but deep down, I knew better. Something in Mark's eyes told me he wasn't finished, and something in mine told me I wouldn't go quietly. The first few days in the new house passed like a gentle dream. Everything smelled new. Fresh paint, polished wood floors, newly bought rugs still shedding threads. My room was on the ground floor, just beside the kitchen. Mark jokingly called it Grandma's wing, and everyone laughed, even me. I tried not to mind the slight distance it symbolized, separate but still part of the house. I told myself it was thoughtful. I didn't have to climb stairs. It was practical. The kids were thrilled by the bigger space. Emily claimed a corner of the upstairs hallway for her toy hospital, while Jonah bounced his basketball off every wall until Becky made him take it outside. Every afternoon I'd sit on the porch swing, listening to their muffled footsteps thudding above, and something inside me would stretch and soften. It had been so long since I felt close to them. Becky was more relaxed too, at least in the beginning. She'd drop by my room after work, sit on the bed with her shoes still on, and we'd talk about her day. I'd nod, offering tea and little cookies I kept in a glass jar by the window. For the first time in years, I felt useful again. Present. Not some aging relic tucked away in a forgotten apartment, but part of something living. Mark, surprisingly, was courteous. He included me in conversations about furniture placement, groceries, even weekend plans. He joked that I was the landlord with benefits and made sure I had my favorite brand of tea stocked in the pantry. I smiled through it all, letting the lightness settle. Maybe I had been too suspicious. Maybe this could work. Then came the first dinner. It was Sunday, and I spent the whole afternoon cooking. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans sautéed in garlic. The works. It wasn't just a meal, it was a declaration. I'm here. I matter. I still know how to make this family whole. We all sat around the new dining table. Becky lit candles, Mark poured drinks. The kids giggled over spilled gravy and tried to sneak extra rolls. "This smells amazing, Mom," Becky said, slicing into the chicken. "I haven't cooked a full meal in ages," I replied, pride swelling in my chest. Mark raised his glass. "To our chef and patron saint of home ownership." We clinked glasses, and I looked around the table. The glow of the candlelight reflected in their eyes, softening the edges. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged again. I wasn't just their past. I was part of their present. After dinner, we played a game of cards in the living room. Emily curled up next to me, whispering secrets about a boy in her class. Jonah, competitive as ever, accused Mark of cheating and then fell into a fit of laughter. Even Becky looked at peace. That night, as I folded the last of the laundry, I felt my chest ache. Not from age, but from gratitude. I had feared I was too late, that no matter what I gave, the door to family had closed. But it hadn't. It was open, and I had stepped back in. The following morning, Becky made pancakes. Mark offered to drive me to the post office. Emily brought me a picture she had drawn, me with a crown and the words, Grandma Queen. I taped it on my wall beside Thomas's photo. I wanted him to see what I saw, the beginnings of something real. Over the next few days, small routines took shape. I picked the kids up from school when Becky was swamped. I helped with homework, clipped coupons, watered the plants. They called it help. I called it healing. One afternoon, as I folded Jonah's tiny shirts, Becky popped in. "You really don't have to do all this, you know." "I want to," I said. "This is what I've always wanted." She nodded, but something flickered in her expression. Guilt? Doubt? It vanished before I could catch it. Later that night, I sat on the porch again, sipping tea, the magnolia tree rustling in the breeze. Mark joined me, unusually quiet. "This really is a beautiful house," he said after a pause. "It is," I agreed. "Thank you for making me feel welcome." He smiled tightly. "Of course. Your family." The way he said family didn't sit right, but I pushed the thought away. I'd spent too long being alone to let one off note ruin the melody. I leaned back in the chair, watching the stars appear one by one. Somewhere inside, doubt lingered. But for now, I let myself believe this peace was real. Because sometimes, before the storm, the sky pretends to be calm. It began with a whisper, barely a crack in the perfect facade. One night, I awoke to the sound of muffled voices. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant hum of the fridge. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard Becky's voice, sharp, hushed, urgent. I slipped out of bed and followed the sound to the stairwell. The vent on the wall carried their voices down like ghosts floating through air. "She's always around," Becky hissed. "Every time I try to have a moment with the kids, she's just there." Mark responded, slower, measured. "You knew this would happen. She's not going to just sit in her room all day." There was a pause. Then Becky, quieter. "I thought it'd be different. I thought she'd help, not insert herself into everything." Mark sighed. "We'll figure it out. But we need space. This is our life now, not hers." The words landed like a punch to my chest. I held the railing to steady myself, my heart pounding louder than their voices. I stood there, in the dark, like an intruder in a house I paid for. I returned to my room and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the nightlight glowing softly in the corner. Just hours ago, I had helped Emily with her science project. We laughed when her volcano exploded too early. Now I wondered if that moment, too, had been too much. The next morning, nothing seemed different, on the surface. Becky greeted me in the kitchen with her usual smile. "Sleep okay?" she asked, pouring coffee. "Like a rock," I lied, stirring my tea. My hands trembled slightly, but things changed in small, almost imperceptible ways. Becky started making dinner earlier before I finished folding laundry or came back from errands. One night I walked into the dining room to find them halfway through their meal. "Oh," she said, startled. "I didn't know you were back." "I'm always back by 6, I replied, unsure if she was truly surprised or pretending. "Well, we started early. The kids were starving." Mark didn't look up from his plate. Emily offered a quiet, "Hi, Grandma," but no one moved to make space at the table. I took my plate to my room that night, told myself it was just one time, but it happened again and again. Eventually, Becky began framing it as concern. "Mom, you should take time for yourself. You don't have to feel like you have to be at dinner." "We understand." "I want to be at dinner," I said. She smiled gently. "Of course. But let's try something. Maybe just a few nights a week so we don't overwhelm the kids' routines." The words sounded kind, but underneath I felt them pressing against my ribs like invisible fingers, shoving me aside with politeness. Even Mark had begun to change. No more playful comments, no more tea suggestions. When I spoke, he'd nod but rarely answer. He no longer asked my opinion about anything. Not the grocery list, not the furniture, not even the thermostat settings. One afternoon, I noticed Emily's drawing, the one with Grandma Queen, was gone from my wall. In its place was a family photo I didn't recognize. Becky, Mark, the kids, at a beach. I wasn't in it. I asked Becky about the drawing. "Oh," she said, "I think Emily took it for her school project. She wanted something colorful." She didn't meet my eyes when she said it. Another night, I brought home cookies from the local bakery, the kind Jonah loved. I left them on the counter with a note. The next day, the cookies were gone. So was the note. No one said anything. I began to eat all my meals in my room. My door stayed closed more often. At night, I walked past the family room and watched the glow of the television through the crack in the door, the sound of laughter behind it. I didn't knock. I didn't want to see the subtle flinch that sometimes crossed Becky's face when I entered. I started journaling again. At first, it was just a few lines. Did the laundry. Walked 2 miles. But soon, the words poured out. Pages filled with confusion, sadness, and a growing ache I couldn't name. How had I gone from cherished guest to invisible presence in my own home? The worst part wasn't being excluded. It was the way it was dressed up in kindness. "We just want you to relax. You deserve your space. This is for your comfort." Each phrase felt like a velvet rope being pulled gently across a hallway until I found myself walled off in silence. One night, I stood by the window in my room, watching the moonlight pool on the grass. The magnolia tree stood still. No breeze, no movement, just me and the hum of a house that no longer knew I was inside it. The warmth I had once felt, the dinners, the laughter, the toasts, flickered like a dying candle. I realized then I had traded loneliness for rejection, and this rejection was far crueler, because it wore the mask of family. The housewarming party was Becky's idea, and she poured herself into it with a level of energy I hadn't seen in years. String lights were hung across the backyard, twinkling like lazy stars. Folding tables were rented, a caterer was called, and Mark even borrowed a Bluetooth speaker system to play a curated playlist he proudly titled "Good Vibes Only." I stood in front of my mirror, smoothing the wrinkles in my navy blue dress. It was the same one I wore to Becky's college graduation. It still fit, surprisingly, and I thought Thomas would have smiled to see me wear it again. I added a brooch he gave me on our 10th anniversary, then reached for my small pearl earrings. Classic, simple, just like I wanted to feel. Tonight would be different. Tonight, I'd meet Becky's co-workers, Mark's friends, and the neighbors. I wasn't just a background character, I was the reason this house existed. And for one night, I hoped I'd be seen again. As guests began arriving, the backyard filled with conversation, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Kids darted between adults, and platters of finger foods floated from one side of the lawn to the other. The music was soft but cheerful, matching the early evening's golden light. I mingled, smiling until my cheeks ached. I met Becky's manager, a charming woman named Cheryl, who complimented the flower arrangements. "You have a great eye," she said. "Did you hire a planner?" "Oh, no, that was mostly Becky," I replied. "But I helped out, of course. After all, I bought the house, so I had to do something useful." Cheryl blinked. "You bought it?" Before I could respond, Mark stepped in smoothly, laughing. "Mom's being modest. She helped us out a bit, just a little jump start, but we pulled most of it together." My words stuck in my throat. Cheryl nodded, offering a polite smile before drifting off. I turned to Mark, who was already pouring wine into a guest's glass, as if nothing had happened. "Helped out a bit?" I had sold my home, drained my retirement account, and handed them the keys to their dream, and I was being recast as a supporting donor. Generous, but not essential. The moment stung, but I forced myself to smile. "Don't make a scene," I told myself. "It's just a misunderstanding. Keep it together. Later in the evening, I noticed guests being led through the house for tours. Becky played the perfect hostess, her heels tapping proudly on the hardwood floor. Mark pointed out the kitchen upgrades and the imported tile in the bathroom. I trailed behind a group, listening. This was all part of our vision, he said, gesturing at the newly hung family portraits. Took months of planning and budgeting. Did you work with a realtor or go solo? Someone asked. We handled most of it ourselves, Becky replied. We were lucky. Things just fell into place. No mention of me. I lingered near the hallway, listening, waiting, hoping for acknowledgement. But nothing came. Even Emily, when asked about the house, chirped, "Daddy picked the color of my room." And me? I might as well have been another houseplant. Pleasant but irrelevant. As dusk turned to night, the lights brightened and the music grew louder. I stood near the dessert table watching everyone dance under the stars. My feet ached, but more than that, something deep inside had begun to splinter. A quiet cracking I couldn't ignore. Jonah ran up with a cupcake smeared across his face. "Grandma, look," he said, holding up a balloon dog. I smiled and hugged him tight. "Having fun, sweetheart?" He nodded, then darted off again. For a moment, I watched his little legs bounce through the crowd, and I wondered what memory he'd keep of this night. Would I be in it? Near the end of the evening, Mark clinked his glass for attention. "Everyone! Just a quick toast. Thank you all for being here tonight. This house means the world to us. It's a symbol of growth, of family, of hard-earned success." He raised his glass. Becky beamed beside him. "To new beginnings," he said. Everyone echoed him, glasses raised high. I stood at the edge of the crowd, holding my untouched wine, whispering to no one, "To sacrifices you'll never understand." As the applause faded, I felt a familiar ache, one I thought I had left behind. That same ache from years ago when I sat alone on birthdays, waiting for Becky to call. The ache from watching other grandparents stroll with their grandkids while mine were hundreds of miles away. The ache of being forgotten while still very much alive. Back in my room that night, I took off my earrings, placing them gently in their box. I undid my hair, wiped off my makeup, and stared at my reflection. It wasn't bitterness I felt, it was grief, because I realized I hadn't joined their life. I had been absorbed into it until I disappeared. The last guests had just left. Paper lanterns still glowed faintly in the backyard, bobbing gently in the breeze like ghosts of a happier hour. I was washing the last wine glass in the kitchen sink when I heard the soft knock on my door. It was nearly midnight. "Come in," I called, drying my hands. Becky and Mark entered side by side. Their expressions were unreadable, too neutral for such a late visit. Becky wore her silk robe, her arms crossed loosely. Mark leaned on the doorframe like a lawyer about to deliver bad news gently wrapped in charm. "We wanted to talk," Becky began, not sitting down. I nodded, gesturing toward the chair beside my bed. "Everything okay?" Mark cleared his throat. "It's about the living arrangement." I froze, towel still in my hands. "What about it?" Becky sighed, then stepped forward. "It's not working, Mom. For us." The words didn't register at first. I blinked. "Not working. It's just, Mark and I need space. For the kids. For our marriage. Having you here, it's complicated." My mouth opened, then closed again. "I've tried to stay out of the way." "I know," Becky said quickly. "It's not about anything you did wrong. It's just, this isn't what we imagined." Mark added, "We thought it would feel like family, but it feels like we're living in someone else's shadow." I stood there, stunned. "But I paid for this house. I sold my home for this. I gave everything. We appreciate that." Becky interrupted, her voice calm, rehearsed. "You've been so generous. But maybe it's time to look at other options. There's a nice senior living community near Oak Ridge, or maybe a small condo. We can help you find something." My legs felt weak. I sat down on the edge of the bed. "You want me to leave?" Becky didn't respond. Mark looked away. The silence screamed louder than any accusation. "I thought this was our home," I said, voice trembling. "A fresh start. A family again." "You'll always be family," Becky whispered, "but we need our home to feel like ours." I don't remember how the conversation ended. I just remember standing alone in my room, staring at the boxes I hadn't unpacked yet, the suitcase in the closet, the faint outline of the crown Emily once drew for me, now erased from the wall. I packed in silence. One suitcase, a few clothes, my photo albums, Thomas's brooch. I left behind the dishes I had bought, the curtains I'd sewn, the rocking chair that had belonged to my mother. There was no space in my heart, or my rental car for nostalgia. I moved through the hallway like a ghost, careful not to wake the kids. At least I hoped I wouldn't. But as I stepped into the foyer, suitcase in hand, I heard tiny footsteps. Jonah stood at the top of the stairs, rubbing his eyes. "Where are you going, Grandma?" I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, Becky appeared behind him. "Back to her place, sweetie," she said quickly. "She just forgot something." Mark walked up from behind with a brown bag. "Your medication," he said, handing it to me. "Don't forget your arthritis pills, old lady." He said it with a smirk, like a joke, but it wasn't. It landed like a slap. I took the bag without a word, nodded to Jonah, and walked out. The night air hit me like a wave, cold, sharp, humbling. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your footsteps sound like thunder. I loaded the suitcase into the back seat of my rental and sat behind the wheel, gripping it until my knuckles turned white. I didn't cry, not at first. I just stared at the house. The warm lights in the upstairs bedroom, the kitchen window glowing softly, the home I had dreamed of, paid for, sacrificed everything to create, and now it wasn't mine. It never had been. The tears came later when I pulled into a motel off the highway. I checked in under my maiden name. Something about that felt right, like I was returning to a version of myself I had long abandoned. In the dim room with the humming air conditioner and floral bedspread, I lay down in my clothes, staring at the ceiling. This wasn't rejection. This was erasure. And in that moment, beneath the fluorescent hum, I knew I had crossed a threshold I could never return from. The motel walls were paper thin. Margaret could hear the muffled thump of a television next door, some sitcom laugh track looping through the night. Her room was dim and sterile, furnished with plastic chairs and a chipped dresser. The bedding smelled of bleach and old smoke. It was a far cry from the home she had spent decades building and a lifetime paying for. She had been here 3 days, long enough for the staff to stop smiling at her in the hallway, long enough for her to lose her appetite. There was a diner across the street, but she hadn't been inside. Her stomach had grown used to the ache. She drank only instant coffee from the lobby machine and nibbled on the crackers she'd brought from the house. The thought of food made her sick. Margaret sat by the window most days, staring out at the parking lot, watching people come and go. No one noticed her. A ghost with silver hair and eyes too tired to meet their gaze. She couldn't sleep. Her mind circled the same memories over and over again. Becky's first fever when she was 2, her 8th grade graduation, the way she used to crawl into bed at night and whisper, "Don't let the monsters get me." Margaret had fought every monster for her daughter. Now Becky was the one who opened the door for them. She blamed herself, not just for trusting too much, but for raising children who saw love as leverage. She wondered if, in all those years of being strong, dependable, selfless, she had taught them she didn't have boundaries, that she didn't need respect, just obligation. On the 4th morning, she wandered down the block to stretch her legs. Her knees ached from disuse. Her breath came short from nights of stale air. A small bookstore sat nestled between a laundromat and a nail salon. She stepped inside mostly for the warmth. The bell over the door jingled faintly. It smelled like old paper and rain. She was turning the corner of the local history aisle when she heard a voice behind her. Margaret? Margaret Collins? She turned slowly. The woman before her had short silver hair and wore a blue scarf tied with flair. Her eyes lit up beneath wide-rimmed glasses. It's me, Martha Ellison. We sat next to each other in English Lit. Junior year. Professor Whitley's class. You used to quote Sylvia Plath at me until I hated her. Margaret blinked, stunned. Then slowly a smile broke across her face. Martha, she said, almost in disbelief, you were obsessed with iced tea and terrible poetry. They both laughed. Martha stepped forward and hugged her, without hesitation, without questions. It had been over 40 years. They sat in the cafe inside the bookstore, sipping peppermint tea, catching up between bursts of laughter and quiet sighs. Martha had moved to the area to care for her sister after a stroke, but her sister had passed 2 years ago. She stayed anyway. I like the quiet, she said, and bookstores with bad coffee. Margaret didn't tell her everything, at least not at first. She said she was between homes and taking a breather. But Martha was too sharp for vagueness. After another cup of tea, Margaret sighed and said, They asked me to leave. My daughter, her husband, said I didn't fit into their home. Martha's face didn't twist in pity. It hardened with fury. They asked you to leave, she said. After everything you've done for them? Margaret nodded, unable to meet her gaze. I gave up my house for them, my savings. My name's on the deed, but that didn't stop them. Martha reached across the table and took her hand. Margaret, that's not love. That's theft in a pretty frame. Margaret's throat tightened. I thought I did everything right. Raised them well, sacrificed, taught them kindness. You did, Martha said. They just didn't learn. That night, Margaret didn't go back to the motel. She accepted Martha's offer to sleep on her couch, a warm, worn floral piece that smelled of cinnamon and books. It wasn't much, but it felt like something she hadn't felt in weeks. Belonging. Margaret awoke on Martha's couch, the soft light of morning filtering through lace curtains. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw the bookshelf lined with novels, the tea mug with Martha's initials, and the faint aroma of scones warming in the oven. She was safe, for now. As she stretched and sat up, Martha appeared from the kitchen, apron dusted with flour. Morning, Martha greeted, setting a plate in front of her. Eat. You look like a scarecrow with manners. Margaret chuckled weakly. Thanks. That's the nicest insult I've had in weeks. They sat together, eating in quiet companionship, until Martha cleared her throat. There's something I didn't tell you last night, she began, eyes narrowing, about Mark. Margaret paused mid-bite. What about him? Martha's voice dropped to a near whisper. He's not as squeaky clean as he likes people to think. Back in Richmond a few years ago, he was involved in a lawsuit, fraud, real estate scam, some house-flipping scheme that went sideways. He wasn't convicted, settled out of court, but it cost him his job. Margaret's fork clattered on the plate. He never mentioned any of that. Of course he didn't. He probably convinced Becky it was just business politics. The words sank into Margaret's chest like a stone. All the smug grins, the condescending jabs. Mark had always carried himself like a man above reproach. Now she saw him for what he was, a polished parasite. I should have seen it, Margaret muttered. I handed over everything unto a man with a history of taking what isn't his. Martha leaned forward. Listen, my nephew works with a legal firm in Alexandria. Family law, real estate litigation. He owes me a favor. Let me talk to him. Margaret hesitated, then nodded. At this point, I'll take all the help I can get. That afternoon, Martha made the call. By early evening, her nephew, Jeremy, was on a video call with Margaret, reviewing documents she'd kept copies of, deed transfers, loan statements, the forged power of attorney. As he sifted through the files, his expression darkened. This is bad, he said. Really bad, but maybe not for you. Margaret leaned in. What do you mean? He tapped on a scanned document. See this? The house your name is attached to? The one Becky and Mark live in? There's a lien on it. Margaret blinked. A lien? Yeah. It was flagged by the county last week. Seems the title was transferred through a third-party escrow company that's under investigation. They're calling it a shell facilitator. Basically, a fake firm used to shuffle deeds around and muddy the paper trail. She felt the blood drain from her face. Are you saying the house might not even be theirs? Jeremy nodded grimly. Technically, it's not. It was never cleanly conveyed. The deed is clouded, and the bank that financed the mortgage is now reviewing its validity. Martha gasped beside her. You mean the house could be seized? Exactly. If the fraud is confirmed, it'll go into foreclosure or be pulled back by the original lien holder. Margaret sat frozen. The very house she had paid for. The home Becky called hers. Now legally vulnerable. Twist after twist hit her like waves. First, she was erased. Now the home itself might vanish from under Becky and Mark's feet. But deep beneath the shock, a strange flicker stirred. Hope. If the house wasn't theirs, if it had been fraudulently transferred, then perhaps, just perhaps, she could challenge it, reclaim some of what was stolen, not just the bricks and walls, but her dignity. Jeremy continued, the bad news is, if your name is on any loan or property connected to this fraud, it could complicate things. You might be dragged into litigation, even if you were the victim. Margaret's brief hope faltered. Litigation? He nodded. You'd need representation. You could lose months to hearings, and it'll drain you emotionally. But if we act fast, if we file a fraud claim with the county and petition to sever your name from the transaction, we might be able to isolate your liability. Martha placed a hand on Margaret's. You don't have to do this alone. Margaret looked down at their hands, one wrinkled, warm with friendship, the other trembling with exhaustion and determination. I've already lost everything once, she said. I'm not going to sit back while they bury me in lies. Jeremy smiled. Then let's get started. As the call ended, Margaret stood and walked to the window. Outside, the sky was dimming, painted with hues of lavender and blue. She watched the breeze stir the trees. For the first time in weeks, her breath came steady. Her back straightened. She wasn't healed, not yet, but she was no longer powerless. The fight ahead would be long, messy, uncertain. But Margaret Collins was no longer walking into it alone. The courthouse smelled like old paper and resignation. Margaret sat quietly in the stiff wooden chair across from Jeremy, her lawyer, as he laid out the final pieces of their case. You've got a solid claim, he said. Power of attorney forged, misrepresentation of financial intent. Plus, the fraud investigation into the escrow company puts everything they touched under scrutiny. The court will sympathize. Margaret didn't flinch. Will I get the money back? Jeremy nodded slowly. Eventually, it may take a few months, but yes, you'll likely be reimbursed, either by the escrow firm's insurance or through damages against Becky and Mark. And the house? She asked. Becky's losing it, he said bluntly. The lien is active. The bank issued a foreclosure notice last week. They've been served with a 30-day vacate order. Margaret stared out the window, her expression unreadable. Once, the idea of Becky losing her home would have broken her. Now, it just felt appropriate. By the end of the week, Margaret received confirmation in writing. She was no longer liable for the loan. Her credit would be restored, and she was free to pursue financial restitution through civil court. She folded the letter carefully as if sealing away a chapter. That same night, her phone rang. She let it buzz 5 times before answering. Hello? Mom? It was Becky's voice, hoarse and broken. Margaret didn't respond, just waited. Becky sniffled, then continued, I know you're mad. You have every right to be, but we're being forced to leave. The bank, they sent a notice. We have nowhere to go. Still, Margaret remained silent. I know I made mistakes. Becky rushed on. I didn't think it would go this far. I was stupid, selfish. I got scared when the market turned. I thought maybe I could fix it before you found out. A pause, then a sob. I've been crying all week. Mark blames me. The kids don't understand. Mom, please. I'm your daughter. Margaret's fingers tightened around the phone. There was a time when Becky's voice, tearful and childlike, would have undone her completely. She would have rushed to fix everything to shelter her daughter from the consequences. But not anymore. You didn't call me because you were sorry, Margaret said, voice low. You called because you lost. No, Becky insisted. I'm calling because I miss you, because I know I hurt you. I didn't mean... You meant to take advantage of me, Margaret cut in. You meant to use my love like an open checkbook, and you did, for years. Silence. Margaret continued. I begged for connection. You gave me conditions. I gave up my home. You gave me a deadline to disappear. Becky sobbed quietly. I used to think I failed you, Margaret whispered, that maybe I hadn't taught you empathy. But now I see. You chose this. You chose convenience over character. You chose your husband's ambition over your mother's dignity. I'm sorry, Becky cried. I know, Margaret said, but sorry isn't a ladder, and I'm not climbing back into the hole you dug. Becky's breath hitched. So, that's it? That's it. And then Margaret hung up. She stood in the quiet of Martha's kitchen, the phone still in her hand. Her heart pounded, not with guilt, but with release. That door was closed, and this time, she wasn't going to reopen it. 2 days after Margaret ended the call with Becky, the knock came. It was not gentle. 3 sharp, deliberate thuds rattled the front door of Martha's modest home, followed by a brief silence. Margaret peered through the peephole, already knowing who it was. Mark. She had expected a phone call. A letter, maybe. But not this, not him, not here. She opened the door just wide enough to speak, her voice calm. You're not welcome here. Mark forced a tight smile. His eyes, however, burned with something far darker. We need to talk, he said, face to face. Margaret didn't blink. Say it here. He stepped forward close enough that she could smell his cologne. You think you've won? That you're going to walk away from this like some wounded hero while we lose everything? She stood tall. You already lost everything. I just stopped pretending it was mine too. His mouth curled. You're bluffing about the lawsuit payout. They won't give you a cent. Margaret tilted her head slightly, the corner of her lip lifting. Not a smile, but a signal. I'm not bluffing, she said. Mark's eyes narrowed. If you take this public, I swear... She didn't wait. From beneath the front console table, she lifted a small black recorder and pressed stop. Red light blinking. Mark froze. Get off my porch, she said, louder now, or the police will hear every word you just said, and then some. He opened his mouth to argue, but behind her, the unmistakable sound of sirens echoed from down the block. Martha, standing in the hallway, phone still in hand, raised an eyebrow. Told you she wasn't bluffing. Mark cursed under his breath and backed away, disappearing into the street like a shadow in daylight. Margaret shut the door slowly, the click of the lock sounding final. Later that week, just as the weight began to lift, Becky came again. This time she didn't come alone. She brought Lily and Jonah, Margaret's grandchildren, dressed neatly, each holding a crayon-drawn card. Their eyes were wide and uncertain, as if coached. Margaret opened the door, but did not step aside. Hi, Mom, Becky said, voice fragile. We wanted to see you. The kids miss you. They made you something. Margaret looked down at the cards. Bright suns, flowers, and the words, We love you, Grandma. Her heart clenched. For a moment, she saw the innocence in their faces. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to reach out and pull them in, wrap them in warmth and forgiveness. But then she looked at Becky. Perfect makeup, nervous smile, and in her eyes, not sorrow, but calculation. Margaret stepped outside, shutting the door behind her. I see you brought reinforcements, she said softly. Becky shook her head. No, this is real. We want to fix things. Margaret knelt in front of Lily and Jonah, touching their hands gently. You two are always welcome to love me, and I will always love you. But love is not pretending. Love is not using people. Jonah blinked. Mom said you were getting money soon, that you could get a big house again. Margaret's stomach turned. She stood slowly, eyes locked with her daughter's. That's why you're here, she said. Becky's eyes widened. No, Mom, You brought them to soften me, so I'd forget the past, hand you a slice of what's left. Becky's voice cracked. I just want my kids to know their grandmother. Margaret breathed in deeply, her voice no longer shaking. Then don't raise them the way you were raised. Don't teach them that love comes with conditions or that apologies are performances. She turned to Lily and Jonah, her voice softening. When you're older, if you still want to see me, if it's your choice, not someone else's, I'll be right here. Jonah's lip trembled. Are we in trouble? Margaret knelt again, kissed his forehead. No, sweetheart. You're the only reason I've held on this long. She stood again, stepped back, and closed the door. Inside, she leaned against it, tears streaking down her cheeks. But this time, they were not from pain. They were from clarity. She had shut the last door that needed closing. The past had knocked, and she had finally chosen not to answer. The house was small, but the porch was wide enough for a rocking chair. Margaret liked that. She liked the way the afternoon sun fell across the faded wood, warming her legs as she sipped chamomile tea and listened to the wind brushing through the sycamore trees. It wasn't much, just 2 bedrooms, a modest kitchen, and a yard with uneven stones. But it was hers. Bought clean, paid in full with the restitution from the lawsuit, no co-signers, no shared deeds, no borrowed promises, just her name. The street was quiet, lined with oak trees and kids riding scooters after school. From her window, she could see the elementary school's red roof down the hill. On her morning walks, she passed a retirement center, where the residents gathered in the garden to talk about aches and grandchildren. It was the kind of place no one rushed. And for the first time in decades, Margaret didn't feel rushed either. She filled her days with gentle purpose. In the mornings, she brewed strong coffee and tended to the flower beds she had planted herself, marigolds, lavender, and a stubborn row of hydrangeas that refused to bloom but still made her smile. She joined a local book club hosted in the town library's back room. The women there didn't ask questions about her past. They just passed around lemon bars and argued over mystery novels. But her favorite part of the week was Tuesday afternoons. That's when she walked to the elementary school and sat on a blue plastic chair in the music room. The teacher, Mr. Gaines, had been hesitant at first when she offered to volunteer. But after seeing the way the children sat up straighter when she spoke, the way they watched her hands move over the keys of the old upright piano, he never questioned her presence again. She didn't do much, just taught the children simple melodies, helped them sing in harmony, and told stories about old songs their grandparents used to hum. The kids called her Miss Maggie, and one little boy named Tyler always brought her wildflowers tied together with shoelaces. Sometimes, when the room was quiet and all eyes were on her, Margaret would close her eyes as she played and feel something she hadn't felt in years: peace. No voices accusing, no pleading phone calls, no paperwork waiting to unravel her life. Just notes and laughter and the soft tapping of small hands keeping time. Evenings were quiet. After dinner, usually soup or pasta she made in large batches, she sat in her rocking chair, notebook on her lap, sketching out a memoir she wasn't sure she'd ever publish. She wasn't writing for anyone else, just for herself. For the woman who had been silenced too long. Sometimes Martha visited, bringing over homemade cookies and gossip about the neighborhood. Other times, Margaret went to the retirement center down the street and played piano for the residents while they clapped along out of rhythm and memory. She didn't talk about Becky or Mark anymore. She didn't bring up the lawsuit or the house or the betrayal. Those belonged to another life, a closed book. Once a letter arrived, from Becky. It sat unopened on her mantel for 3 days before she burned it in the fireplace. Not out of spite, but out of understanding. Some things don't need to be read to be finished. Margaret smiled more these days, not because life was perfect, but because it was finally hers. In the silence of her new home, she had rediscovered something rare, the gentle rhythm of a life lived without apology. And for a woman who had spent a lifetime holding everyone else together, that rhythm was the sweetest music of all. It was a Thursday afternoon in late autumn when it happened. The air was crisp, the sun low in the sky, casting golden light across the sidewalk. Margaret was pruning her lavender bush, humming a tune from the school recital earlier that week, when she felt it, an unmistakable tug. That strange sensation that you're being watched. She looked up. Across the street, half hidden behind a lamppost and the shadow of a maple tree, stood Becky. She wasn't dressed for confrontation. No briefcase, no tightly pinned hair. Just a soft sweater, jeans, and her arms wrapped across her chest like armor that had grown too thin. For a long moment, neither moved. Margaret's shears hung still in her hand. Becky didn't wave, didn't speak. She just watched. Her eyes held none of the fire from before. No desperation, no bitterness, just something quieter, maybe even regret. Margaret took in the sight. Her daughter, older, tired, with a sadness around the mouth that hadn't been there before. And then Margaret did something simple. She nodded. Just once. Not with anger, not with forgiveness. Just a quiet acknowledgement of a chapter closed. Becky blinked. Her lips parted, as if to say something, but Margaret had already turned back to her lavender, snipping gently at the stems, letting the breeze carry the moment away. She didn't look up again, and when she eventually glanced back across the street, Becky was gone. That night, Margaret lit a candle by her kitchen window and sat alone at the table. She didn't cry. She didn't ache. There was nothing left to ache over. She brewed her tea, added honey, and walked outside to her rocking chair. Above her, the stars blinked in the wide Virginia sky. A barn owl hooted in the distance, and in the soft hush of the evening, Margaret felt something she hadn't expected. Relief. Not triumph. Not revenge. Just relief. The past was behind her. Not erased, not forgotten, but folded neatly into the pages of a story she no longer had to live in. She rocked slowly, the cool breeze playing with the loose strands of her hair. Her hands were speckled with age, her eyes rimmed with time, but her heart was light. A car passed. Children laughed somewhere in the distance, and inside her home on the kitchen counter lay a loaf of banana bread she had baked earlier that day for Mr. Jenkins at the retirement center. She had promised to play his favorite song tomorrow. Margaret smiled. She wasn't lonely. She wasn't bitter. She was full. Not because the wounds had been forgotten, but because they no longer controlled her. She leaned her head back, closed her eyes, and let the rhythm of the night lull her into stillness. And as the candle flickered behind the glass, her thoughts whispered the truth she had carried all along. I didn't lose my family. I just finally found where home really is.